The true test of objectivity is judging those you despise by the same standards as those you admire. Unknown author. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. I have a guest. You can't see him, sort of, because he's wearing a green shirt. And he came in and he was like, "I'm gonna say hi," and I was like, "Well, hold up, because we're going through the intro songs. So go ahead and say hi to people." Hello. All right, so you're saying hi. All right, you gonna go play, bud? All right, all right. Close the door on your way out, champ. All right. So a little, sometimes you got a little guest in studio. And I posted the other day. I posted a picture of me and him, and I was like, it's really great waking up and seeing your biggest fan every day, right? And so, like, when your biggest fan wants to kind of come in on the show and just wave and say hi, I mean, you kind of got to let him, right? So that was cool. All right, folks, what do we have today? Well, first and foremost, let me tell you about tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a special guest on. Spike Cohen will be joining me. You might remember Spike Cohen. He ran as the Libertarians' nominee for vice president back in 2020. So yeah, Liberty's son, his head is floating. Yeah, that's what happens when you wear a green shirt in a room that's got green screen going on. So Spike Cohen, he ran for he was the nominee for vice president back in 2020, and he ran. And he now runs an organization called You Are the Power. He's going to be on with me tomorrow morning to discuss some interesting things that have happened that he's played a role in. So look forward to that. I will also tell you that on Thursday, I will be reviewing the TPUSA debate between Dave Smith and Josh Hammer. Now, why would I do that? You can watch it and you can just judge and be like, whoa, yeah, Dave, or oh, yeah, Josh, depending on, who you prefer. Well, on this show, what we want to always try to do is we want to try to advance ourselves. We want to try to improve who we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review their, not so much the, whether I think they were right or wrong per se, but more like, okay, this was a good point. Here's why it's a good point. Hey, they did this well. This was, whatever. And so we're going to break it down so that you, the audience, can walk away and kind of maybe have some tips or maybe even some tricks, if you will, but basically improve your skill at communication so that when you talk to people, that you can be more effective. And maybe one day you'll be on stage debating somebody as well. So that's what I'm going to do. So we've got Friday and Thursday. We've got it figured out. Like sometimes I don't. There's sometimes where I wake up in the morning. I'm like, what am I going to do today? Because I didn't figure it out the day before, and so then I got to scramble and figure it out. No, we're ahead today. We're ahead this week. So knock on wood that we stay that way. All right, today what we're doing. Let's take a look. So this is the image that I showed yesterday. And I said, all right, we are reviewing Randy Fine a little bit. Not so much Randy Fine himself, but he introduced 8 bills. And he wants credit for it, right? Because he says, like, you can see it here. First 100 days. And he's like, I introduced 8 bills. And then what else did this is I'm gonna get over here where I can see it. The words aren't so small. He co-sponsored 23 bills. I don't really care about the co-sponsoring. I mean, that's kind of what you do in Congress. Like people get co-sponsors. I mean, that's there's a value add there. Like if somebody comes up with the bill and they said, I've got 50 co-sponsors, that's kind of a big deal. That means they've got 50 people that presumably support it and will vote yes on it. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But how many bills you've co-sponsored, That I mean, unless you develop a reputation, like say Thomas Massey. Now, if Thomas Massey were to be like, "Hey, I have co-sponsored 50 bills," well, then I would be like, because of his reputation, I would say, "Okay, those must be 50 good bills. I probably should look into supporting those bills, and I should probably look into who is the sponsor, and if it's one of my if it happens to be my representative, then I can give them an attaboy, or I can look and see if my uh, Congress member is supporting this particular bill, and then I can say you should support this bill. Now, you should always review bills. Just because Thomas Massey has a strong reputation with many in the libertarian community and the liberty community at large, just because he has a strong showing doesn't mean that just because he supports something, you automatically should. That's just, but he has developed a reputation where it gets my attention. So if I see that he's supporting a bill, I'm like, all right, there must be something to this bill. Let me review it to see if I agree with it. And more often than not, I probably would when it comes from him. Randy Fine, unfortunately, does not have that reputation. And actually his reputation, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty sour. Like I dislike him. If you listened yesterday, then you know that I had some strong opinions about him. I'm going to try to be a little bit nicer today. We'll see. Okay. And the reason the problem that I have with Congressman Fine, I keep wanting to say senator, with Congressman Fine is that I think he's abusive to his constituents. And I think he says a lot of vile things online, which I'm a free speech absolutist. So I would say you have that right. However, I also have an expectation of every member of Congress to conduct themselves appropriately, to conduct themselves at a higher level and to not engage in that kind of conversation and talk and whatnot. Like that's to me, like for me, leadership means you lead, which means you don't necessarily behave the way everybody else does. There's just a higher expectation, and he does not meet that. But he is a Congress member, and he is submitting bills, and these bills could be passed. So therefore, they are worth attention, even if I dislike him. And it's worth objective attention. So even though I dislike him, if he's got a good bill, he's got a good bill. Likewise with Thomas Massey. I really like Thomas Massey, but if he were to promote a bill that I disliked, I would say so. That's part of being an American, right? We read the information to the best of our ability. We inform ourselves, I guess is probably a better way to say it, to the best of our ability. And then we make a decision based on how we understand and feel about this a thing. But that doesn't mean that we can't look and kind of look and say, okay, well, he's got 8 bills and bristle at them because you're like, I don't know, I don't like this guy, but we're going to be objective. So let's dive right into it. So this first bill, and you know what I meant to do yesterday. Let me see if I can't do this. I meant to do this yesterday, and then I forgot. And it kind of it's just one of those things where you're trying to improve the nature of the show. So give me a second. Let me show it to you here. All right, there we go. There we go. I meant to have this. I created them yesterday, and then I didn't have it. So the first bills, HR 4054, the Accreditation, Choice, and Innovation Act. Now, initially, I really bristled at this because it's 46 pages long, and it amends the Higher Education Act of 1965. I would prefer to repeal it. Part of the Higher Education Act of 1965 established like federal loans and stuff like that. So there are some things that I flat out would object to. And so I would say, let's repeal this because, in my opinion, number one, at the federal level, they have no business getting their hands into education. The states can handle that just fine. All the states are big enough and they have enough resources that there's no reason, even for non libertarians to make and say, well, we need federal government involved in education. No, you don't. You don't need it. Now, maybe you could have made that argument again for non-libertarians many, many years ago when you had, some states that were still pretty small and growing and whatever. And maybe you could have made that argument. I don't know that I would have bought it, but today for sure, every state has sufficient numbers of people, sufficient resources. There's sufficient capability of people moving from, so so let's say you get a small state. Let's say you get a state like Nebraska, right? Like there's not a lot going on in Nebraska, not in terms of like great big cities and education and stuff like that, right? But what they could do is they could court educators from other states and say, "Hey, we'd like you to, come out to our state and and educate our students." So it's not like even these, and I wouldn't call Nebraska a smaller state. I'm just thinking in terms of like population and and maybe their like the amount of money and transactions and businesses and things that are going on there. It's just in that particular sense, it's a smaller state. Okay, not physically necessarily, and somewhat by population. So for me, federal government has no business in education whatsoever. So you might immediately think, well, okay, amending the Higher Education Act would be in opposition. Well, not so fast. This is where things get a little tricky. So let's take a look at this article here. Most of his bills do not necessarily have articles about them. And as a rule of thumb, if you're looking for articles about any bill, the more controversial it is or the bigger the change that you can expect, the more likely you're going to see some talk about it. Otherwise, I mean, there's, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of bills that get, you know, put forward that get introduced at the local, state, and federal levels. So therefore, media can only, they can only manage so many. Same with this show. Like I can only review so many. All right, so let's take a look at this article here. So here's this article, and I might have to zoom in a little bit for you guys. All right, so it says title: Lawmakers' bill would cut DEI crap. And they're quoting him on the DEI crap from school accreditation process. Okay, well, that's popular right now. Nobody who's right leaning of any kind, whether you're like super right wing or just like a little bit, right of center, none of those folk like DEI. So okay, let's see what it says. A Florida Republican lawmaker is introducing a bill to overhaul how schools get accredited in a move he suggests could refocus education toward practical goals rather than ideology. Hmm, that doesn't sound so bad. Accreditation is the process by which schools get recognized as a legitimate institution, and Representative Randy Fine from Florida argues that it has been hijacked. They're quoting him here. The radical left is very skilled at coming up with vehicles to control us. And one of the ways they have done that is they can't control the universities in red states, so they take control of the accreditation agencies, and they use that to push their agenda, Fine told the Daily Signal. Okay, well, we're going to get to that in a moment because you might say, okay, well, that's just an argument that he's making, but is it really true? We'll talk about that in a second. Hold your thought on that. You holding it? Good. All right. Specifically, his Accreditation Choice and Innovation Act proposes a requirement for accreditors not to have conflicts of interest, implements educational performance standards for determining whether a school can be accredited, and prevents accreditors from punishing schools for following their religious mission. House Education Committee Chairman Tim Walberg from Michigan backed the bill in a statement to this Daily Signal. He said, accreditors should be focused on the primary mission of our higher education system, improving student outcomes, not pushing radical agendas. We must empower our students with a high quality education, and that starts with fixing the accreditation system. I kind of agree. I agree that accreditors, if we have them, however we have them, should be focused on education, improving their outcomes, like making sure that when you go through a school and when you graduate, you are competent in whatever material that you've been studying. All right. And not pushing radical agendas. I agree. And again, we're going to get to that in just a moment. Fine views this fight as part of a larger culture war. Accreditors, and they're quoting him again, said, you have to do all this DEI crap if you want to get accredited, end quote. He said, referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates. And then they're quoting him again. The bill says you can't do that anymore. We have the ability to determine what we want accreditors to accredit based upon. He added, I wanted it based on like, do you get a useful degree where you can get a job? Okay, so useful degree, not really like that. There's not a good definition of what that exactly means. But what I will assume in good faith that Congressman Fine means is that a useful degree is one where you can get it and then you can go out and there's a job for you. Now, what makes this challenging, and anybody with a degree or anybody that's paid attention, they know this. You can get a degree in one area and then end up having a career in an entirely different area. Like for example, just using my own family here. Let me scroll this. I don't want that toilet on my scene. Um, so let me, sorry, that was distracting. So using my own family, my wife has a double master's in engineering and in business. And once upon a time, she did work doing engineering type work, industrial engineering specifically. So processes. Basically, what that means is she walks around looking at how she can make all of whatever you do better, more efficient. That's my way of joking about it. But today she works in real estate. Like they seem to have nothing to do. Now, it's not to say that you can't draw from one to the other, but I'm saying like they're not directly related to each other. And this happens all the time. I know lots of people, unless you've went and gotten a degree in a very, very specific area, which, has a very specific use. So for instance, law or medicine, something like that. Like if you went and you've become a doctor, then chances are you will be a doctor. But it's not a guarantee. Like I'll even tell you, the doctor that worked on my inner ear years ago, I believe he was a mechanical engineer first, right? And so then he ended up going toward to become a doctor, and in a sense, we're not going to get into the details, but in a sense, in that particular case, his mechanical degree did come into play because he deals with the inner ear, which deals with standing, mobility, function, stuff like that. So anyway, all right. So to all that being said, I'm just pointing out that the idea of a useful degree is a very ambiguous idea, and it doesn't necessarily mean a lot. And when it says, "Can you get a job?" Well, I don't know that. I think we need to be careful about the expectations that we have because you can have engineers, which would be, can you get a job? Is that a useful degree? They might come out of out of college and still have trouble getting a job, or they may end up they might find out that, hey, I don't really like, I liked learning about this, but I don't actually like doing this, in the real world forever, right? And they may switch careers at some point. So I think we need to be very careful on the outcomes. And let's continue reading. Let's go past this toilet picture. Fine is not expecting any Democrats' cooperation, though. I didn't come here to try to get Democratic support. I came here to save the country. We're in the shape that we're in because of Democrats, he said. Okay, well, that's politics. I would disagree with that in a sense, only in the sense that, like, you have a lot of Democratic colleagues. Perhaps there are some that would look at this and say, actually, yeah, this would improve education. Really, so I think you should always try to get support from across the aisle, if you will. So in that particular context, and it's easy to say that when your party controls the House and the Senate. When your party controls Congress, when your party has the president, I mean, it's kind of easy to say that. But come 2026, come the midterms, he may have to change his perspective if he wants to keep introducing bills. All right. Now this was interesting. This letter, I'm going to try to zoom in on it. So this comes from the American Council on Education. So they wrote about this. I was digging in, and it did catch my attention. So let me kind of zoom in. Only okay. So I'm only going to be able to zoom in so much before I can't read it myself. I probably should have just downloaded the PDF rather than keep it in the browser, but that's okay. So what caught my attention was they said, I write on behalf of the undersigned higher education organizations to share our concerns regarding HR 4054. So we go down and we see who are they. So this includes the American Association of Community Colleges, American Association of State Colleges and Universities, American Council on Education, Association of American Universities, and the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. Okay, so it seems pretty important. All right. They go on to say a bill that amends the Higher Education Act of 1965 to make changes to the accreditation process. The language proposed in this bill mirrors the language found in the College Cost Reduction Act from last Congress, and our concerns with the accreditation components of that bill remain unchanged. However, before sharing our concerns, we'd like to acknowledge areas of the bill we believe offer improvements to the accreditation landscape. First, we have heard from our members about the issues with the current substantive change process and appreciate the language that requires accreditors to have policies in place that would not adversely affect the capacity of institutions to continue to meet certain accreditation standards. Second, we believe that risk-based and or differentiated review process is a much better approach to determining what institutions and programs need further assessment to ensure their quality and ability to meet the needs of the students. I'm sorry, this is a little dry for 7:59 in the morning, but this is where we are. Finally, we support providing institutions with the ability to switch accreditors without the approval of the Secretary of Education. Now, that was kind of interesting. Okay, so that's what one of the things that this bill does is it allows an institution like a college to say, okay, we no longer want to be accredited by this entity, so we're going to move to this entity. Okay. I think choice in any matter is always a good thing. Let's make this super duper simple. Imagine that I love peanut butter and then I have a particular brand that I like. And maybe that brand makes change to their recipe. And so now I no longer like that brand. Well, I can change and I can go to a different brand. And I say, well, I want this. I still like peanut butter, but I'm gonna now get it from this particular company. And because the company that I liked, they changed their recipe. You could do the same thing here. You could say, hey, look, you've changed your accreditation standards. I don't like those standards. I prefer these other ones, whatever those might be. Right. Now, when we go down here, let's see. Where is it here? They, I was trying to highlight this so I could better. Okay, we believe that the change to the assessment of the student achievement outcomes represents a dramatic shift in the role of accreditation and requiring accreditors to monitor compliance with outcome metrics such as median price versus value added earnings or labor market outcomes would inappropriately blur the lines of the program integrity triad and detract from accreditors focusing on academic quality. Okay, so in this bill, there are requirements that the accreditors look at the metrics and the results and say, all right, what are your results? And that plays a role. I got mixed feelings on that part. Like, on one hand, we should be kind of considering results, right? Like, is this good or is this bad? Are you delivering results or not? At the end of the day, though, if I'm a student, really what I just need to know is I need to have transparency with all the information that I might want. And people can figure things out. We do that like they do it all the time with colleges, right? Some kids getting ready to go. We've seen it in the movies, right? I know it's fiction, but we've seen it in the movies. But it's how it plays out. Some kid wants to go to college. He's talking with his other friends, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going here. I'm going here. Why are you going there? Oh, because I want this, and they have this program. Blah blah blah." We can figure out which colleges that we want to go to based on what they're delivering. If there's going to be an accreditation process, and if the government is involved in it, which I think they shouldn't be, but if they are going to be involved in it, then I perhaps we start looking at the outcomes. What are the results that you're delivering? Not necessarily, hey, are you teaching what we want you to teach, what we think is appropriate for you to teach, but rather than turn it around and say, okay, are you delivering results? Do your students generally graduate and are able to get a job? Now, that could be a challenge on one hand because you look at it and you say, well, okay, but what if the job market's not hot right now? What if it's in a slump? Then does that go against you? Presumably, that would go against all the schools on some level, maybe some more than others. So I don't have a problem with it. I feel like this is kind of similar to testing, where you've got these argument like, okay, and then we argue about teaching to the test and all this other stuff. I think all of those are reasonable concerns. On the other hand, I I think we've probably got a system that needs to be modified at a minimum, abolished in some sense, at least from government control, would be most preferable. Um, Now, here's what really caught my attention, and this is why I don't oppose the bill. Furthermore, we fear that allowing states to become accreditors could also blur the lines of the program integrity triad, especially considering the unpredictability of the treatment of institutions in any given state and the possibility of widely varying standards across possibly dozens of new accreditors. So, this bill allows states to become accreditors. Now, that's really where I was like, whoa, because you're expanding it basically. You're expanding who can accredit an institution. So if we can't abolish it, and if we can't get the government out, then I think we should always expand and say, let's just include more, right? And then they have this risk-based review process. They also have a process to review the results. I am definitely about being results oriented. Is it a perfect system? No, not at all. It's one where there are mistakes, there are problems, because there are mistakes and problems in any given system. Like there will always be failures. That's just the nature. If you can have success, you can have failure. Period. So I want to swing back now because we were talking about this like, is there DEI, et cetera. So this is tangentially related. So it's not directly related to accrediting agencies. But I want to play something this is my own video. So I'll move myself out of the camera shot for this. But I want to play this video for you, and it's just like about a 1 minute video. I made it in response to there's somebody named Politics Girl, and she was, this was back when there was this argument of CRT and whether or not CRT. Remember how whether or not CRT was in schools or not? And the first argument was there's no such thing as CRT, and then they were like, okay, well, there is a CRT, but it's really at the academic level in colleges. And then they were like, okay, well, it's actually in there, and but it's for a good purpose. Remember, the story kept changing about whether or not CRT was in schools, and eventually we got to the truth. It was almost like that meme. There's that meme, and I don't remember what the title of it is, but it's got like the guy and the girl, and he's leaning on the door, and she says something, and then he's like, "Excuse me," and then she kind of rephrases it to be a little bit more accurate, and then he's like, "No," and then she finally comes out and says exactly what she means. He goes, "Thank you." It's kind of like that. That's how CRT was. So I want to play this video, and then I'm gonna tie this together. But CRT is not entirely the made-up boogeyman that doesn't exist but does only in academic circles. Consider the published paper titled "The Cat is Out of the Bag: Orientalism, Anti-Blackness, and White Supremacy" in Dr. Seuss's children's book. Under the section Current Activism, it says, as critical race scholar activists, we engage stakeholders, including youth, families, and teachers. In 2017, we submitted this stakeholder feedback and our study findings to the National Education Association's Read Across America Advisory Committee. RAA is the nation's largest celebration of reading, with over 45 million annual participants. We advocated that they use their platform to promote anti-racist diverse books. NEA committed to start transitioning away from Dr. Seuss, changing RAA's theme to celebrating a nation of diverse readers, and use the event to promote social justice. They removed all Dr. Seuss books from their annual Read Across America resource calendar at RAA events in 2018. It is teachers, school administrators, and parents who will be creating and enacting change in their classrooms, school districts, and homes. So much for academia. Two self-identified scholar activists wrote about convincing a committee to promote social justice in an annual nationwide program with over 45 million participants. When people say CRT doesn't exist, but does only in academia, and doesn't or does exist only to teach honest history, stop fucking lying. All right. So apologies for the profanity there. the reason the reason for that was because the video that I was responding to by Politics Girl at the end, she was like, "Stop effing lying," and so I made kind of like a counter video where I basically laid it out and then kind of spoofed the end because I think she had a drink in her hand, so I had a glass of vino in my hand. But the point here is that in 2017 these two activist scholars, and that's how they self-identified. Like you can go read the paper, and they say, as activist scholars, we approached the National Education Association. That's the largest. That is the largest uh, teachers association in the United States, and they said we want you to commit to promoting social justice. And so then they took this program. Now, what makes this whole thing very interesting is that the Read Across America program, this whole thing where like the reason they're removing Dr. Seuss is because the whole event was designed for Dr. Seuss. It was in celebration of all of his books. So they're like, oh, Dr. Seuss has all these great books. Let's create a nationwide event that celebrates Dr. Seuss. And you can go look up. There are pictures upon pictures of like people would show up at events and they're dressed like Cat in the Hat and other characters from Dr. Seuss. Like it was a big thing. And so then you had these activist scholars, they got in and they said, yeah, let's manipulate this. Let's get the, and so they pulled all of the books and they replaced them with social justicey type books. Social justicey is a word. I'm telling you. But that's what they did. So the what this legislation is responding to, when Congressman Fine says, "Hey, there's DEI and we need to fight it," he's kind of right in a sense, right? Like activists, scholars, and educators, but basically activists, they have, and I don't like to use the word infiltrate, but in a sense, they've infiltrated all these institutions and they have implemented their vision. Now, this is where libertarians could shine because we could point out that when it comes to the left, what they do is they infiltrate, right? In a sense, they get in there. It's like the running joke about how they've infiltrated HR and now we've got DEI and HR and all this other stuff, right? Well, the same thing in education. And they've implemented all these standards that they want. And then Republicans or people on the right, they come along and they go, oh, we need a law to fix that. Now, that is not my ideal situation. This is basically this is fighting the culture war by implementing your cultural ideas in an institution and then somebody else coming along and saying, "All right, well, we want our cultural ideas. We're going to combat your cultural ideas with our cultural ideas by implementing law." And then it's just a battle of whether or not that law stands after it goes through like a judicial review, because a lot of these laws um, end up getting challenged for one reason or another. All right. So in that particular context, I hate it. Hate. It's terrible. And I've talked about dealing with the culture war. And in the past, I've said the culture war, what libertarians could do is they could say, look, everything is on the table to be talked about. Like we can have a conversation about everything. However, when it comes to um, some things, that most things do not need legislative response to. Society can figure it out on its own, right? Then there might be a smaller subset of things where, okay, let's have a conversation about it, and maybe we pass legislation or maybe we do something different. And then there might be this even smaller subset. Sounded kind of weird. Smaller subset of issues for which maybe we do need to have some legislation for, right? So I think this is where libertarians could shine. But until such time, we kind of got to figure out, like, all right, we got to choose our battles. We got to figure out what do we want. Now, in this particular case, I don't like the idea of using legislation to combat cultural issues. However, because the cultural issues have already steeped themselves inside of these institutions through rules and policies, they have to be dealt with. So if this is the best that Republicans can do, well, then I guess we're going to have to kind of take it. Right now, some people might argue and say, no way. But I'm looking at this in terms of Practicality, because at the end of the day, we have students that are going through the system, they're getting an education, and we should probably, at a minimum, at least say, what are the results? Are students graduating? I've talked about this in the past. Students at 12th grade, somewhere between the reading comprehension level at or above their level for 12th graders is like in the 30%. And it's even lower for math. Like, that's bad. That's awful. Like, we need some better results. If you think of it this way, I would prefer to abolish the Department of Education. I would, both at the federal level and at the state level. I don't think the states are, from what I can tell, the states aren't managing it any better. But here's the thing: I look at it as, since I can't abolish these things, I've got to figure out, okay, well, what can we do? Well, if we're going to go to more of a results based, testing, then that's to me preferable than ideology, because we're compelling people to go to school for 13 years at least. And if they go to school for 13 years and they graduate and they cannot even read at a level that we've said you should be able to read at this level, we have failed them. We as a society and the schools. And so it's a huge complex web. Ideally, I would get rid of it all, but I can't. So I'm going to fall on favoring, okay, what are the results? Can students read? Can they go out and get a job? Now that's subjective and it's very difficult to, and so we'll have to see how this plays out. But I will lean in the direction of this particular bill as maybe call it holding my nose, because I would rather something else, but I will give this a pass. So, which is surprising, because honestly, I thought Randy Fine, I dislike this man. I can't stop. He's the person that I think is the worst person in Congress personally. But in this particular case, I think this is a fair bill for a Republican. Now, if a libertarian were presenting this, then maybe I'd be a little bit more harsh. But considering what we have to work with, I support this particular bill. All right, so let's move on to the next one. And this next one is HR 4033, the Sturgeon Conservation and Sustainability Act of 2025. Now, this bill is a very short bill. It is, let me see how many pages. Where are you? It is 3 pages long. So let's put it up on the screen. We can read through this really quickly and we'll discuss it. All right, there we go. I got to click on a couple things here, get it all nice and ready. All right, so there we are. Okay, bam, here's the bill. Okay, so 4033, this is the Sturgeon Conservation and Sustainability Act of 2025. Let's read it and skip down here. Section 9B of the Endangered Species Act of 1973 is amended by adding at the end the following. So they're going to take an existing act and they're going to amend it. Now, as a rule of thumb, when it comes to things, acts, especially at the federal level, my first inclination is to repeal. Period. Repeal. Like everything. But I've got to convince my fellow man. So what I have to do is I have to say, all right, maybe in some cases, like the previous bill, we support it. Let's look at this one. All right. So in general, subsection A1 and section 7A2 shall not apply. So now they're amending it to say the following does not apply to whatever you just read, to the previous act. A sturgeon farmed that is legally held in captivity or in a controlled environment as of the date of enactment of this paragraph until such time as the sturgeon is intentionally returned to the wild, or progeny of a sturgeon described in clause until such time as the progeny is intentionally returned to the wild state. Okay. So basically we're talking about farmed sturgeon. Okay. So they're saying like everything doesn't apply to a farmed sturgeon or its progeny, babies. Demonstration. In general, any person holding any sturgeon or progeny described in subparagraph A shall be able to demonstrate that the sturgeon or progeny qualifies as a sturgeon or progeny as applicable described in that subparagraph. In other words, Hey, can you show me that you're farming sturgeon? Okay, then this doesn't apply to you. Everything doesn't apply to you. It doesn't apply to your sturgeon. Uh, Maintain and submit to the secretary on request of the secretary such inventories, documentation, and records as the secretary may be regulation require as being reasonably appropriate to carry out the purpose of this paragraph. Okay. And then I think that's basically it. So ultimately, it doesn't really tell you what it's doing exactly. So in that particular sense, I dislike this bill. Okay. So I have a problem. I don't like bills where, let's go back to this one. This looks a little more pleasing. I don't like bills that don't tell me what its purpose is for. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And I've said this before. Every time there is a bill, the first question that I ask is, what problem are you solving? If you're not solving a real problem, if you don't have evidence that there's a real problem, which in most cases there's not, um, there's not the evidence. That doesn't mean there's not a problem. That just means people haven't done their due diligence to provide the evidence necessary that I think is appropriate. If you don't have that, then we shouldn't pass the legislation because every piece of legislation has an unintended consequence. The unintended consequences sharply rise when you're looking at what does this bill do? To the best of my ability, this bill, what it does is it frees up people that are farming sturgeon so that they don't have to follow the strict requirements in the Endangered Species Act because sturgeon are endangered species. So, what is it really doing? On that sense, I don't know. So, in that sense, I would fail the bill. On the other hand, they are actually freeing up people that they're saying, all right, if you're farming sturgeon, you're exempt from this legislation. Well, as I just told you, I don't like legislation, right? I would rather, especially at the federal level, like if different states wanted to apply different rules on how they handle sturgeon, I would be much more sympathetic to that than the federal government. The federal government should not be in this at all. So ultimately, we should repeal the Endangered Species Act and allow the states to deal with that. However, again, I have to decide. All right, is this something that I can support? Well, if you're expanding what people can do, then I usually support that. And I have to so I hate this because I have to pass this bill again, right? Because I have to weigh it out. Like, okay, you're not repealing it. I know I'm not going to get a repeal for a very long time. Okay, so that decision's out the window, unless I just wanted to be very hard nosed. And if I was going to be that hard nosed, well, then I would just fail every bill. And then what's the point of doing a bill review? I would only review bills that I like, which are very few, and then I would have less content. Not that's not why I'm doing it. But ultimately, I try to be practical about this, and I just look and I say, okay, well, if you're expanding what people can do, then I will always take that. I will always take it because it's like government doesn't really expand what people can do. They usually limit what people can do. So you got to fight against that. And so the moment that they're like, we're going to expand this and we're going to give you a little bit more freedom, I just jump on it. So in that sense, I'm jumping on this. Um, and I think it's a good thing overall to not lose entire species. I don't know that the government is the entity that should be responsible for making that happen, considering they're not good at much of anything. But again, I fall back on uh, you're giving more latitude for people to operate and to work. So people that are farming sturgeon, they have fewer restrictions. Presumably, that's going to assist them in increasing the sturgeon population, which then would allow the sturgeons to come off the endangered species list, presumably, right? Because you have more freedom to work and if they're farming them, well, then they're clearly trying to increase their numbers. So I'm going to support that. Now, these are tentative. This one's more of a tentatively support because if I find out some other information later, because right now all I had to work with was literally the bill. The bill is all I had to work with. All right, so let's check out the comments. Let's see how bad you guys are tearing me up for supporting Randy Fine's bills so far. So remember, yesterday I failed all four of them. Today, out of four, we've supported two. So we're at 2 and 4 on support and oppose. So like kind of interesting, and it was surprising to me. Let's see what you guys are up there saying. Oh, we got to get to the. Let's do this. Bam. There we go. All right. Let's see. Yes, Liberty's sun head was floating. Like I mentioned, the green screen earlier. Um, you Are the Power does more to keep local government overreach accountable than any politician could ever think about doing, my VA lady says. Yes, that is true. And we'll hear more about that from Spike tomorrow about how his organization goes out and holds local governments accountable. They do a great and wonderful job. Thomas Massey probably votes no on 50 bills, and I'm okay with that. Yes. As a rule of thumb, if you vote no on a bill, I will probably support you. Not always true. There are bills out there that I think are very important. Like I saw a bill, I think it was Rand Paul, that would have restricted no-knock raids from local and state law enforcement agencies. And I was like, I could support that. I didn't like the way that it was supported because they were using funding. They were like, oh, if you got funding, then you won't get it if you apply these. But that's how the federal government, implements things. And, we got to get a better Congress. We need more Thomas Masseys in there if we want things to work a little better. Joe says, narrator, Randy is not fine. That is true. I agree. I agree he's not fine. Now, here's the interesting thing. I was talking to a friend of mine, fellow libertarian, also here in Florida, and he was telling me, he said, when it comes to things like education, Randy actually isn't so bad. He just happens to have this very terrible personality, and he treats people very terribly. There's even, I think even Ron DeSantis, after Randy Fine got elected to Congress, he came out and he was like, look, the dude has a terrible reputation because he's a jerk to everybody. He said it in much more, slightly more diplomatic terms. I'm not diplomatic because it's a podcast and I don't have to be. What else we got here? Hey, here's a new person that I haven't seen in either in a while or ever. I can't remember. Uncle Smitty says, this is by far my favorite aspect of your show, Bill Review. Your research and analysis is strong with this. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, and look, if I analyze a bill and you disagree, feel free to disagree and tell me why, because maybe there's something I didn't consider, and I try to be practical about this. I am a libertarian, and ultimately I will fall, if you say, what's your honest, true opinion? I would say, like, the past two bills that I just reviewed, they shouldn't even be a thing because we shouldn't have the federal government involved at all. However, I am going to say, all right, well, if we can make things, we can remove encumbrances on the people, then I will favor that. And then just keep removing and removing and removing. And then maybe one day we can just remove some of these pieces of legislation and abolish them or repeal them altogether. That's a theory. It's not a very good one. Joe says, cancel DL. You should. I would do that. I recommend it, honestly. Kagela says, this makes Sturgeon rules lighter. Good. That's kind of how I see it. Just like, all right, if you're going to make the rules lighter, I'm good with that. May not be my favorite, may not be ideal, but I'm going to take what I can get. All right, folks, let's go to a quick intermission. Then we'll be right back and we'll follow up with two more bills and we'll see where we land with those. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right. Okay, so we have two more bills to review. So this next one is House Resolution 472. Let's get my little screen here going. So we've got House Resolution 472 condemning the anti-Semitic terrorist attack in Boulder, Colorado. So let's start with this. If you noticed, the past two bills were HR. They basically stands for House of Representatives. Those are actual bills. So those are things that they will vote on. Then the Senate will have their version, and then they'll vote on it. And then once everybody's voted on it and they're all in agreement with the particular bill, then that bill will go to the president's desk and he will either sign it or veto it. Okay, those are bills. This, however, is a resolution. This in this particular case, it's a simple resolution. I've talked about this before. You have the House resolution, you have a concurrent resolution, and then you have a joint resolution. A joint resolution is between the House and the Senate. I have forgotten for the moment what a concurrent resolution does exactly. I think that one may be similar to a bill. And so I think that one actually does have some level of force of law. And so it would actually go to the president. But the House resolution, HRES, like this one, and a joint resolution, those do not go to the president's desk. He has no authority over them. And the reason for that is because they're kind of like they just basically express an opinion. It's basically showing that, hey, this body of people care about a thing, and this is where we stand. That's basically what it amounts to. So, for instance, Jacksonville, they had a resolution condemning the terror attacks in Israel by Hamas. Okay, fine. Like they can't do anything in that particular case. There was nothing for them to do. They could not pass any kind of actual legislation, but they wanted to get their opinion out there anyway. So they were able to pass a resolution and say, "Hey, we condemn, you mass murdering people," because if they hadn't condemned it, then we would never know, right? We wouldn't know where they stand on mass murdering innocent people. But, they made a resolution, so therefore we know. And we're like, "Oh, good. You guys oppose mass murder." Sorry, I'm being a little cheeky there. So this one, let's take let's take a look at this. Let me see what we got here. Do. So, yeah, hold on. Let me get to the right. Do I have the right one showing? Let's see here. Oh no, this is not the one I want. Hold on. Let me get to the right one. Yeah, there we go. 472. Okay, perfect. Let me get this up on the screen for you guys. Boom. There we go. Okay, so we have this up on the screen. So HRES 472. So now you know what it is. Let's read it. It's really simple. Whereas on June 1st, 2025, 12 innocent American citizens were the subject of a coordinated terrorist attack meant to take the lives of Jewish Americans. Whereas those attacked ranged from the ages of 52 and 88, with one of the victims of the attack being a survivor of the Holocaust. Whereas the perpetrator of the attack, Mohammed Sabri Salman, used Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower in an attempt to murder individuals specifically because of their Jewish heritage. Whereas Mohammed Salman was reported to have yelled, quote, "Free Palestine," end quote, as he initiated his attack against a crowd of innocent Americans, peacefully bringing awareness to the innocent Americans peacefully bringing awareness to the hostages that remain captive in Gaza. Whereas this heinous terrorist attack comes amidst an alarming rise in anti-Semitic violence sweeping the United States. Okay, on that note, I would disagree. And I do not believe that the evidence is there. I've talked about it in a past episode. Every time I dig into the details, there always are problems, major problems, right? I did a whole episode, or not a whole episode, but I did a whole bill review on Senate Bill 937 back when Biden was president. That was the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, and I debunked it. They said, "Oh, there's this huge rise of anti-Asian behaviors," and I looked into it and I said, "Your own research says otherwise." When you actually look at the details, uh, and every time I'm like, nah, I disagree. Anyway, whereas in the last 2 months alone, radical pro-Palestine activists have killed and engaged a couple working at the Israeli embassy and set fire to Governor Josh Shapiro's home, whereas Mohammed Solomon had illegally overstayed his initial visa and should have never been permitted to remain in the country as long as he was. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives unequivocally condemns the anti-Semitic terrorist attack that took place against innocent Americans in Boulder, Colorado. condemns anti Semitism in all its forms and expresses grave concern about the rise in anti Semitic behavior and actions reported across college campuses, online, and in other spaces. Again, disagree there. Prays for the swift and full recovery of all those injured in the attack and expresses thanks to the police and emergency responders for their immediate action. Calls for the perpetrator of the terrorist attack to be prosecuted under the full extent of the law because, like, if you hadn't called for it, that wouldn't happen. Urges Congress to take immediate action to secure the border and deport migrants who overstay their visas. Okay, so that's their resolution. Um, I'm kind of torn on this, and the reason that I'm torn on this is because it's just a resolution. It's basically them expressing an opinion. I don't really care. Like, you can express your opinions all day long. What I care about or what you enforce through the rule of law. So there are things in there that I think are inappropriate. And if this was a bill that actually did something, I would reject it. But because it's a House resolution and I don't particularly care, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a pass because I'm going to be nice. Now, here's the other thing. I want more of this. I would rather Congress just sit around coming up with resolutions and saying, we agree with this, we disagree with this. Fine. Excuse me there. Fine. Just do that. Sit around and just tell me what you approve of or disapprove of. That would be far better than most of the legislation that you guys come up with. Really. Just give me your opinion. Now, should you get paid to give me your opinion? That's an entirely different story. But ultimately, I don't have a problem with resolutions. I might disagree with them, but I'm not going to make a big stink of it. And my biggest problem with a resolution like this is I feel like it generally should go without saying. Like, who does not condemn the attacks? Everybody should. I mean, if you don't, then fine. This is America. You have the freedom to have your own opinions. But I think it should be understood that in America, if you ask anybody, like, just think about it. Just go up to somebody randomly. Just think about it. Just mentally think this through. You go up to somebody and you just say, "Excuse me, sir." Let's pretend this is a microphone. Like, "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. I would like to have your opinion. Do you think that it's okay to throw Molotov cocktails at people based on who they are?" You don't even have to say Jewish, just based on who they are. Jewish, black, white, tall, short, whatever. Right? And you're going to be hard pressed to find anybody that says, "You know what? I think that's acceptable." Like, everybody's going to say, "No, that's a terrible idea and you should go to jail. You should be put in a dark hole somewhere, never to come back out." That's what's going to happen. So I don't think we need to pass resolution. It's kind of like when people were saying, and I'm going to touch upon this a little bit more in Thursday's episode, so wait for it. But it's kind of like when people talk about these terrorist attacks and they're like, "Do you condemn October 7th?" Like, yeah, I thought that was a given. I thought everybody condemned literally going and attacking innocent people and murdering them. I thought that was pretty standard. Like, it would be shocking if you didn't. But people, like, want that confirmation because, we live in a society that has to have, warning labels on everything. "Hey, don't stick this screwdriver in your eye." Oh, man. I'm glad they told me. If they hadn't told me, I would have never guessed it. Right? It's kind of the same concept. Like, "Oh, if you hadn't have told me, I would have never guessed that you condemn mass murder. I would have never guessed that you condemn throwing Molotov cocktails at people for who they are." you know? So for me, I have a problem with the idea that we think this is necessary. And in that context, I hate it. But again, this is not a real bill. This is just them expressing their opinion. And that's fine. And if somebody were to vote no on it, then they can be in trouble with their constituents. But I would imagine that pretty much everybody is voting yes. All right, let's get to this last one here. All right. So this last one is Preventing Anti-Semitic Harassment on Campus Act of 2025. All right. So let's take a look at that bill and we'll pull that up on the screen here. So let me do. This is the final bill here. Where are you? Let's see here. There we go. All right, let's get you on the screen. Ba-boom. All right. And I got to try to figure out how to make these so they're a little bit more readable on the screen, but this is what we got. Okay. So this one is to amend Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, I would probably gut the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and maybe I'll do a show on that. I think there was actually several acts, and I think some of them I was a little bit more sympathetic to, and others not so much. But basically, I look at it and I say the government really should just treat everybody the same. Like you just say you just put in the law and say everybody gets treated under the law the same, right? Period. Whether you're black, white, immigrant, citizen, we get treated the same. You get your Miranda rights if we have to, if an officer determines that they have to detain you, or arrest you, I guess. If they detain you, then they have to follow certain guidelines. They can't just rough you up, right? Everybody gets treated the same. If you bring a complaint to the government, they have to address it in the same way they would anybody else, right? And maybe they throw it out because they say maybe your complaint's not legitimate, or maybe they say, hey, we got it, we got a real problem here. We need to address this. But everybody should be treated equally under the law. Period. And I think you can make that in literally like a sentence or two. Right? If you really want to expand it, you can make it a whole paragraph. But we should be clever enough at this point that we could just make everybody equal under the law in a sentence or two. Okay. Rumble blipped out on me. So if you left a comment up until this point and I haven't read it, I no longer can see it. Don't know what to tell you about that. Sorry, apologies. All right. So let's get back to this bill. So let's go through this bill. This bill is 10 pages long. And I believe I had some highlights here. So I'm sorry. Let's go back up a little bit. There, non-application of prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of religion to religious organizations. So the prohibition of discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal finance assistance on the ground of religion under this title shall not apply to a program or activity that is conducted or controlled by or is otherwise affiliated with a religious organization, including student religious organization. So the prohibition of discrimination of anybody receiving federal funds shall not apply to anybody that's religious. Okay, that one I have to oppose it because while I don't think the prohibition of discrimination should be a thing at the federal level, you should not be choosing who can and cannot discriminate. And that's what it says. It says the prohibition of discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal funding, financial assistance shall not apply to any program or activity conducted or controlled by a religious organization, including a student religious organization. So, no, you should have to follow the same discrimination rules as everybody else. We are treating people equally under the law. This is not equal. Now, ideally, the federal government would be like, nope, we're not getting involved in that. We're out. States can deal with it. Maybe cities if they have to, counties, whatever. So there's a problem already. So let's go down the line here. All right. The term discrimination for purposes of this title and with respect to an educational program or activity of a college, university, or other post-secondary institution or a public system of higher education includes deliberate indifference to harassment that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, and that so undermines and detracts from a victim's educational experience that the victim is effectively denied equal access to the resources and opportunities of the educational program or activity. No, I oppose this as well. Let's walk through this here, okay? Because what we're saying is if there's indifference to the harassment. So I'm a student on a campus and somebody's harassed me. They're like, "Oh, you Indians, native, you featherheads, you get out," right? And then let's say that I feel like it's severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, okay? And that it takes away from my educational experience because, I have to walk past a crowd that are, booing and hissing at me for being Native American, but I can get into my school, if I can still access, the education, tongue tied there. If I can still access the classroom, um, maybe my experience is diminished, but, is it diminished to the point where I'm not getting what I'm paying for? Okay. That's a big difference. Diminished, you're not getting what you're paying for. What are you paying for? You're paying for an education. Are you not getting it? Are you not able to go to your classroom? Or is the classroom itself being disrupted? That would be a problem. But if they're just people that are being harassing, then like that's freedom of speech and people have that right. On the other hand, where it really is a problem to me is so they're defining discrimination to include the deliberate indifference to harassment. So if I go to somebody and I say, "Hey, these people were making fun of me for being Native American descent," and then they said, "Yeah, that happens on campus," then I could, in theory, say, "You're discriminating against me because you're showing an indifference to my diminished experience, not experienced, but diminished experience." So now this person is in trouble for not acting. I don't like that because what ends up happening is when you tell somebody you will get in trouble if you don't do something, they will generally overdo it. And I don't like this kind of ambiguity in our in legal documents, in laws that people could be punished for. I don't like that because now the school is going to have an incentive to make sure that they don't in any way look like they're discriminating by virtue of not addressing an issue. So now the chances are they will become more heavy-handed in order to be sure that they're complying with the law. I object to this. So it doesn't work for me. So on this one, I'm going to fail it for those two reasons. Okay. But also, it's not the federal government's job to, as the bill title states, it is not their job to prevent anti Semitic harassment. It's not their job. What we should have, and I'll give you because I hate when people say this is a bad bill and then don't point out how they would address it. Here's how I would address this issue. I would say if you are a student and you are paying money, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, to a university for an education, and your education is disrupted and you can prove that in court, you could go to court and say, this institution, I paid them. I did not get the service that I paid for. They owe you money and they might owe you compensation, like additional compensation, right? For your trouble, having to deal with having to take time out of your day to go file a lawsuit, to show up in court, to argue your case, to pay for a lawyer, So I would extend and say, look, you have to compensate for that as well. Because if I come to your college and I pay you $100,000 so that I can become a graduate, and then on my way, if there are people that are just heckling me, okay, well, I can still get I can still get my degree. I can still get my education. I might have to deal with unsavory people, dumb college kids doing and saying dumb things. Okay. But as long as they're not touching me, as long as they're not physically impeding me from being able to get my education, that means get into the classroom, listen to the instruction, right? And maybe there's some other additional things on campus that would be included. They can work that out, right? But if I could demonstrate that in a court of law, then they should pay me for, the damages. Period. That's how we solve this problem. I think the libertarian answer in many cases is contracts between different individuals or between groups. Contracts. You violated I mentioned this. You guys didn't see it, but if you're a Rumble Premium subscriber and you've been watching my Mom Donnie videos, I mentioned this as an alternative for dealing with bad landlords. I said, instead of putting all these rules into place and then expecting government to follow through and deal with, okay, yep, you're a landlord, you violated this rule that we put into place. Now we're going to punish you. You owe us money. Okay, you didn't pay us money. Now we got to do this, blah, 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 blah. I say, rather than do that, because the government's obviously not doing their job up in New York and many other places as well, the better way to do it is if you're going to have any kind of law, say, look, here are the things, instead of having a law that says you have to do this, here are the things that have to be in the contract with the individual that that is signing. So in that particular case, you would say, okay, if you're in New York City, they have laws that say you have to keep the heat on at certain times during the winter, right? So that people don't freeze to death. Okay, fair enough. That's a reasonable request. Nothing wrong with that. But rather than say this is the law, I would say put it in a contract. And then you say it is law that every contract has to have this in it. And then you open up the judicial system so that somebody who's a small guy, the renter, the lowly single person, maybe a single mom or a single dad who's renting, doesn't have much money, they have easier access to the judicial system. So even if it's a big shot rental landlord, they can be taken to court, and they can say, look, they violated the contract between me. They owe me damages. Okay. Me, not the government, me, right? Same thing here, right? We're passing legislation to say, well, you will be in trouble with the government if you don't do these things for other people. No, better off to have a contract and say, okay, if you're going to be if government's going to be involved, which by the way should not be the federal government, it should be the state government. The states can say, in our state, you have to put these things in the contract that you make with students. And if the student determines that they can prove you violated that contract, you owe that student, and we, the government, will be the arbitrator of that. That would be a more appropriate way of handling anti-Semitism. Number one, it would be a way where different, like in this particular case, different Jews may have different perspectives, right? One Jew might say, hey, I was picked on and bullied as I was walking to class. But they might not be able to demonstrate that, hey, they weren't able to get their education still. So maybe they have to deal with the fact that some people were just being jerks. But then maybe another Jewish student might be able to say, hey, as I was walking to class, these students got in my way, prevented me from getting there on time. I missed some of the instruction. I reached out to the school and they didn't do anything about it. And now I am paying for a service that I was unable to get because the school didn't want to take care of it. Well, in that particular case, that person might be able to go and say, I'm going to file a lawsuit against the school because they're in breach of the contract. They owe me. And I think that would be a far better way to handle things. Number one, the person who alleges some sort of crime or failure against them, they would be the one that actually receives any benefits, like directly. And then any government would simply just be in the role of arbiter. They would be arbitration. That's it. So that's how I would deal with this. Because the way that it's written right now, it's saying, hey, you better go out of your, I mean, it's not really saying it, but in a way, it's saying you better go out of your way or you'll be in big trouble. And they have fines if you look down further in the bill. It's like for the first offense in 5 years, for the second offense, I think the second offense in 5 years, they have to pay like 10%, or I think it was the first offense, they pay 10% of the federal funds that they get. The second offense, they pay like 33% of the federal funds that they get. And I don't remember if it was like annually or for the month or whatever, but there's some percentage based on the federal funding that they get. And I understand it, but that's a substantial amount. By the way, they shouldn't be getting federal funding in the first place. So that I would remove. But I'm failing this bill because I think there's a better way to deal with anti-Semitism and to make it more specific so that we can preserve free speech and prevent colleges and universities from being too heavy-handed with it. So now, if this bill passes, what I would expect is that if somebody held up a sign that just said, I dislike Jews, right? If they held that sign up, then the school may punish that person. But they really shouldn't, not at least at the direction or to prevent from getting in trouble with the federal government. Now, if the campus says, hey, we don't tolerate any of that, and you will get in trouble because of our rules, then fine, that's great. Like, I have no problem there. But I think we have to be very, very careful about what our government kind of either directly tells people to do or the potential unintended consequences, which we can foresee. And in this particular case, I foresee it going pretty badly, being heavy-handed, and I don't like that. So I failed this bill. All right, so where does that put us? Out of 8 bills that he's introduced, and remind you, let me put this back up on the screen here. All right, his first 100 days, he introduced 8 bills. You do not get attaboy for introducing bills. I talked about this when I defended Thomas Massie. I mentioned it yesterday, but the number one introducer of bills, the Congress member who has introduced the most bills, which I believe was out of Nebraska. He introduced like some 500 bills or something like that in this Congress. And out of all of those, one made it to the president's desk. And then the person who had the most bills reach the president's desk, which was 8, he introduced 65 bills. So the idea that I'm going to give you an attaboy for introducing bills, no, you don't get it, because it doesn't guarantee anything. It just says that you're writing bills. Well, I could write bills too. I could get hired and just go write bills and be like, man, look at all these bills that I'm introducing. Okay, that's not impressive. But I will review the bills because they have a potential for becoming law. And in this particular case, we have found that 2 bills, or no, so was it 3? I think it was 3 bills. 3 bills I supported. Okay, so I supported I supported kind of more begrudgingly the House resolution condemning the anti-Semitic terrorist attacks in Boulder because, like, hey, you're just giving your opinion. I support the Sturgeon Conservation and Sustainability Act because that frees people just a little bit, but it frees them a little bit more. So I'm always good with that. And then I supported the Accreditation Choice and Innovation Act because that one expands people's the accreditation that can happen to the states, which I think is a good thing. And by the way, I forgot to mention this. If you're expanding accreditation to the states, what does that mean? That means there's just a little bit more forward advancement toward abolishing the Department of Education. However, that kind of gets nullified with this bill that I just reviewed, preventing anti-Semitic harassment, because do you know who would be responsible for enforcing that act? Yes, it is the Department of Education at the federal level. So on one hand, Mr. Fine, Congressman Fine, has one bill that seems like it would weaken the Department of Education a little bit, but then another bill that would strengthen it. So I'm opposing the one that would strengthen it, supporting the one that would weaken it, even if it weakens it only just a tiny little bit. But you get no attaboys just for introducing your bills. So we need to see bills that have passed and that were good bills. More importantly, were good bills. All right. That's my show today, folks. Let's check out whatever remains of the comments. Sorry about that a moment ago. Rumble Studio just kind of blipped on me, refreshed, and so now we've got what we got. Yes, just checking to see if Liberty Dad sees his comment after the glitch. Yes, I do. In fact, let's see. That Liberty Lady says there were no new comments on Rumble before the glitch. Okay, so fair enough. One more plug for Spike Cohen of You Are the Power Wednesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Says that Liberty Lady. Yes, make sure that you tune in tomorrow, 7:30 a.m. Spike Cohen. We're going to be talking about You Are the Power, and we're going to be talking about an interesting development that he played a role in. So that will be exciting. I look forward to that. Then on Thursday, I'm going to review the debate between Dave Smith and Josh Hammer. They debated. I don't know the exact title of the debate exactly. Like if there was I think they just debated in general foreign policy over in Israel. I don't know if there was a specific, like they didn't do it, Harvard style, where they have a proposition and they either agree or disagree, and then there's voting. They didn't have all that. They just basically came up on stage and had a discussion / debate. It was very interesting, and there's going to be things that you guys can learn about. So let's see. Oddsman says, we want Spike. We want Spike. We want Spike. We want Spike. And you shall have him. All right, folks. That's my show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys tomorrow with Spike. Until then, make sure you stay safe and guard your liberty. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.